All right, so staying with the concept of BRICS, South Africa, of course, is laying out its plans for the gathering. It wants to yield an investment bonanza for the country. So we need to take a closer look at some of the important steps it must take to define equitable trade and investment terms. Last week, we carried on the program what the Trade, Industry and Competition Minister Ebrahim Patel said, concluding several business deals with the Chinese delegation that was led by China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao. And Patel had said that the visit led to significant results in trade and investment between the countries. So let's discuss all of this now with Professor Rod Alence, who is with the WITS International Relations Department. Prof Alence, welcome and thank you very much for your time tonight. You know, there's so much happening, so many discussions. Of course, we're inundated with a number of delegations and conversation pieces. As you look at this all together, what's your snap assessment of how the terms of engagement for trade and investment between partner nations and South Africa are shaping up so far?
Well, I think the big question for BRICS from its formation over the past 13, 14 years has been whether BRICS as an organization can become something more than the sum of its parts. So we know that BRICS accounts for a large proportion of the world's population, a significant proportion of world GDP. But the real question is, can the sort of aspirations to improve trade and investment flows among these 5 countries that are scattered throughout different regions of the world, can it add value to the kinds of trade flows and investment flows that we would have seen anyway? I think that there have been some promising discussions. I think the pre-BRICS sort of mini summit with the Chinese president seemed to be moving in a positive direction. And then, of course, there's also these debates about developing a trading currency that wouldn't be so vulnerable to Western sanctions.
Okay, let's go then to the value portion of what you've just said. We have an overall trade deficit with the other 4 BRICS countries. We know it's dominated by China. We do about 830 billion rands in trade with them. The interesting thing that was pointed out was that when you look closer, what's revealed is that this trade is mostly in raw materials, which then come back as finished products. We heard the minister and the president make the point that this should change. What do we need to do as a country to ensure that it goes beyond talk and into the written conditions of trade?
Yeah. Well, I mean, trade is a tricky thing because it's not just government to government, but it's also firms and consumers, transacting privately. But I think, a big part of the marketing of BRICS as being a positive development in terms of breaking these historical patterns of exporting primary commodities, importing manufactured goods, was that this is supposed to be South-South cooperation. And just because it's South-South, it would lead to something different. But in fact, when you unpack the trade flow, leaving aside even the trade deficit, when you just look at the breakdown of what South Africa is exporting to the BRICS countries, it's overwhelmingly in the area of primary commodities. Yeah. So, just for comparison, there are actually 5 Southern African countries to which South Africa exports larger amounts of manufactured goods than it does to China. And so that's obviously something that will need to be worked on. I think there was some talk, in avocados and beef, some assistance with solar technology, importing solar technology, but I haven't really heard a lot about kind of major. I mean, there are aspirations to increase the amount of manufactured exports from South Africa to the other BRICS countries. Really, the proof is in the pudding that we'll need to see going forward whether that actually starts to materialize, because 13, 14 years in, the patterns still look pretty similar to what they looked like at the beginning.
And you know what, Prof, tell me what you think of this. So I got the sense that Africa sounded like a giant shopping mall, filled with resource delights that other countries would love to get their hands on, a lot of opportunities to invest in the continent, build trade and supply routes and so on. But how should we proceed to ensure that the partnerships are equitable and that they yield fair outcomes across the African countries in which they're found?
I think the the key thing from a South African perspective is really going to be, well, with the other BRICS, that there is maybe some concessions on tariffs for exporting manufacturers into, say, China, India, and so on. So that will be a big factor. I think there's still a lot of intra-regional issues before South Africa can become this, full gateway to an integrated African market. When you think of what's happening in Zimbabwe today with the election, South Africa is actually exporting more manufacturers to Zimbabwe, even in their current state of crisis, than it does to China. And sometimes it makes you wonder if, 10 years from now, when you look back at this week in history, whether it might be the developments in Zimbabwe, for better or worse, that could have a bigger effect on South Africa's job creation through foreign trade than the BRICS Summit.
Yeah, very interesting. There's so many external factors outside of, BRICS proper that will impact how some of these deals and, trade relations are defined. Just to close out, how would you evaluate, and a quick answer, please, Prof, if you can, how would you evaluate the investment conduct of our BRICS partners based on projects that are already live?
I think countries, firms look for the best investment opportunities. They look out for their own interests, not necessarily for other interests. And the key in the end is really, can we find win-win solutions where both sides get something out of it? But as I said, I think that the real test is, will BRICS become more than the sum of its parts going forward?
Thank you so much. We really do appreciate your time this afternoon, Professor Rod Alence, who is with the WITS International Relations Department, just kind of spelling out what the trade and cooperation environment is looking like as these talks proceed. We really do appreciate your analysis this afternoon.